Closed captioning is brought to you by Crown Battery, manufacturers of the Walleye One marine batteries.
Now look, at my age you need little reminders of what the different lures are in your box. What I've done here is I've actually cut off the tag from the package of jigs, and you can see I've got different tags there. And the reason I've done that, this is the flipping jig that I was using in the very heavy cattails. You can see that they call it a grass jig, and it's 1 1/8 ounce, so it's a pretty heavy jig. Look at the configuration. And these particular jigs also have these rattles, which are kind of neat. See these two little antennas? They almost look like eyes. You can probably hear them even at a distance if I shake them. So this particular flipping jig is designed to penetrate heavy cover. When I say heavy cover, cattails that are growing 5 or 6 feet high, where especially if the wind's blowing, you can't get a normal jig or even a plastic worm in there because it gets caught on the actual grass. So what you want to do is literally toss it up in the air and let the weight of this go right through the cattails that are flapping in the wind and go right down to the open water pockets. I've caught lots of bass, 4 and 5 pounds, using a heavy jig like that. Now for most flipping, people will use a 1/4 or a 3/8 ounce flipping jig, and that's what I've got here. And this jig head also has the rattles you can see on either side, but I also want to show you a really nice grub barb that they have. Now there's the Trigger X material that I've got on there, and this looks like a crayfish swimming away. You can see how supple this is, this material with the little ridges. To hold it in place, look at this nice little system. They've got a little tag of metal, so I'm just going to slide the trailer up. You see the little tag that's there? So it's just a little piece of stainless steel, and it's got a hook on it, so that when I put the grub that I want to tip this flipping jig with in the right position, and even sitting the right way with the flat part on the bottom, the ribs on top, all I do is tag it there with that little grub barb. Now it's going to be in the right position and swim properly along the bottom. You know, another way you can do this vacuum principle is to cast plastic under anything that's overhanging the water. You see this nice big willow tree that's behind me? I was trying to get my plastic right back. And we're in the middle of the day, see how strong these rods are without breaking them. Middle of the day, and a lot of these bass, largemouth bass, will go to cover. Now see the bit of a color difference here? Some of the bass that we've been getting in the really green reeds and cattails were such a vibrant green. And this guy is a little bit grayer, and his belly's a little bit wider too. That's about a 2.5 pound largemouth. They're also plump. You can see those black bars coming out on the side. So I'm just going to get them back into the water. You can see here that the water isn't as clear because we're fishing on open shoreline. Just took off nicely. What I've done too, because it's the middle of the day, I've gone with a plastic that has an attractor tail. What I mean by attractor, you'll notice that it's white. Let me just get it straightened out here for you. And I've got the screw lock weight system. So there's my plastic that I'm using. It's about 6 inches long, and there's the worm hook that I'm going to put in right about there so that it sits straight on there, just like that. Now watch when I put it in the water. When I say attractor, watch this tail, how visible it is. This is a really good tip for fishing midday. So what I'm going to do is just put it in the water here, and whether this is dropping, you see how it's helicoptering? Look, or I'm lifting it. You see what an action tail that is? I think that the bass zeroes in on that tail action, even though they like the blue flake. So all I do is I'm plopping this in, letting it fall to the bottom. When it hits to the bottom, if you'll notice too, the tail stays up off the bottom. So it's very easy for a bass to come up to this and inhale it. And when they inhale it, they usually inhale the whole chunk of water, so they get that worm right in their mouth. Excellent technique to use whenever you're fishing shoreline cover. Now it might look like I'm fishing right out in the open, but what I'm actually doing is fishing a shoal that has a lot of weeds tight to the shoal. You can actually see the clumps here as I spin the boat around. And I'm still fishing these plastics and just dropping it in between the patches. See all the aquatic vegetation that's here? So the same plastics that I was using casting the bank and fishing the cattails when the fish are going into cover will also work when you're fishing in open water where there's weed beds and the fish are going to cover as well. Nice little largemouth. And as I put him down in the water, you can see all the vegetation, the thick vegetation that I was talking about. Normally this stuff is hard to fish, with other lures, a lot of guys will use spinner baits. So what I'll do here, I'll just show you the technique in a minute. I'm just going to make sure that my worm is rigged up right. The reason these Texas rig worms work so well, and also minnow baits, is because the hook is inside the center. So there's no way that they're going to get caught up on the weeds. Sometimes you get weeds on the weight, but most of the time even the weight is pretty weedless. So I'm going to make sure that all the vegetation is off. So once again, you can see the hook is inside. There's no way that anything's going to catch on it. And what I'm going to do is just face the wind here in a moment, because we're almost off this little weed patch. And you'll see what I'm doing here. I'm just casting out, making short casts, just like I was when I was fishing around the cattails. And just working little patches.